So welcome to Loch Shanna in the Mourne Mountains for this field test and first look at this Hilleberg Jannu. So what do you think of my lovely weather? It was actually forecast a couple of days ago for solid sun today, and I can tell you it's a long way off it, but that's all part of being out in the outdoors. Look, this is my sort of thoughts and first look on this tent. Some of you out there will actually own one of these and will have a lot more experience using it than I have. But I have actually talked to two owners of Hilleberg Jannus and got a fair bit of detail from them in respect of some of the pros and cons and their experience of using it. I've also used many four-season tents over the years, and I've worked in industry, so I have a pretty good idea. When I say worked in the industry, I actually worked in the industry buying and selling tents and outdoor gear for over 4 years, so I have a pretty good knowledge of what works and what doesn't work. So talking about me not actually owning this tent, I have to beg, steal or borrow, and in this case it was actually a borrow, and I borrowed a tent from Gary Nesbitt. So Gary, thank you so much for lending me this Hilleberg, and I'm delighted to get the opportunity to review it, so thank you very much for that. Alright, so in this video, it is pretty detailed, so if you're not interested in the detail, it's maybe not for you, but you can kind of look at the time codes at the bottom, and you can see then what sort of what aspects do interest you, and you can have a look at those. But look, I'm going to cover things like tent design, interior volume, vestibule volume, you know, and cooking. I don't really like doing this one, but I always just throw it in anyway. Ventilation, I suppose it is important. I'm going to compare it with another Hilleberg tent, which I think is would give us a good run for its money. Here's a tent actually for, but I'm also going to look at two aspects that I haven't really seen much of on YouTube. One of them is a slightly negative aspect, and the other one is a definite big positive, like a big positive. I haven't really heard it mentioned, and I would definitely, it would make a difference for me in respect of whether I was going to purchase this tent or not. So stay tuned to see what that is. So tent design and a little bit about construction as well. So it's a 3-pole semi-geodesic tent. It's designed really for alpine use, and it has a small footprint, so it can kind of fit like on narrow ledges. It's a full 4-season tent, but it's one of Hilleberg's red label tents, which means it's 4 seasons, but it's designed at the lightest possible weight to sort of cope with four season weather. Now the tent design is fly sheet first, and it's operated by a system of short pull sleeves and clips, and that is very easy to use. A big benefit of this is being able to put the tent up in really bad conditions, and as I'll show you sort of in a moment, you know, setting the tent up, you kind of build a tent from ground up. The design allows that the guy lines are actually directly attached to the poles, and that really gives the poles, you know, very good support. Now I don't have these particularly tight at the moment, but really when these are tightened up and you're pushing against the pole, you know, the guy lines really support the poles extremely well. So this tent, the way that it's designed, it really does get a lot of support actually from the guy lines. So the setup of the Hilleberg Jannu, we have 3 poles, 2 equal length and 1 shorter one. So these are the 2 longitudinal poles, and this is the transverse or shorter poles. I'm not going to show you, I've got the tent already pegged out and the poles already assembled. I'm just not going to go through that with you, there's really no point. So it's a matter of just inserting the poles then in the pole sleeves. They are color coded just to make this a little bit easier. So it's a very simple process. So once the poles are inserted in the pole sleeve, it's then just a matter of clipping the tent from the ground up, and I usually do sort of two clips at a time. I just work my way around the tent. I think it just builds the tent evenly. If you're in a real rush, you can probably do 3 or more, but it just keeps all the tension on the tent even. It's particularly important if it is windy or the conditions are a bit harsher. Now, some of the clips here are actually quite tight, so you just have to push the pole down. Now, usually at this point, before I put the ventilation cover on, I actually just check the tent to make sure that all the clips are actually secure and have got them all in and I haven't actually missed any. And then it's just a matter of sorting out the ventilation cover. It's quite a big cover on this tent, so it works really, really well. But again, you just need to be very careful that it's not, that it's not caught on anything and that it actually looks right. Now, one thing you do need to do here before you put the ventilation cover on is just wrap this guy line around both poles. And then lastly here, just staking out the vestibule. So one aspect about these tents is they actually have a lot of guy lines, and the structure relies on guy lines for stability. So because there are so many of them and there are so many of these clips, you absolutely need to have the guy lines tied up before you're going to pitch it, or else you'll have a tangled mess. So if this happens to you, you either should have watched my video or else you should have listened to what I'm saying. You got to have these guys tied up first, but then it just takes a bit longer unraveling all of these. But that's just the way it is. And if there's, whenever I'm taking a tent down, and I go home, I don't obviously do this. And then when I'm starting it out at home, I redo it all. And I tell you, it is some tangulation of guy lines and clips and fabric. It really is a nightmare. So definitely not something I would like to be trying to deal with actually when I was out pitching the tent. So again, we're on a wrap around here, wrap the guy line around the pole, and that just supports the pole directly and makes it really, really, really strong. Now I've had one go at pitching this tent, and I'm not sure if we can use, we can use a single pegging point here, which is good. I thought I was possibly going to have to use two to give the pole optimum support, but we can actually use one, and that's a lot handier. So that's a tent pretty much secure. I wasn't 100% sure just how many pegs I would need because it's not my tent. So I've got, let me see, I've got 1, 2, carry these all up here with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 7 extra pegs. And sort of pitched on sand at the moment, and the pegs aren't incredibly secure. So what I'm actually going to do is, on the important pegging bits, instead of putting boulders on these, because I have the pegs, I'm just going to use them. I'm just going to back up all these pegs with a second one. You see there just how easily that actually came out. So this is me set up in one of the options here, obviously for cooking. Now, I kind of like this one, where I have everything tied back here and it's just a space in the middle. It just gives you really good protection. If the wind's coming directly behind the tent, you're sheltered, or if it's even coming from the side of it, this would be one of my favourite ones. Height-wise in here, I'm obviously sitting on a closed cell, mat here and a thermarest. And I can sit up comfortably. Now, obviously, you can see that this hood's kind of coming down and my head is just sort of kind of touching the roof of the tent. I'm 6'1", and that doesn't really bother me. I'm sort of finding it is actually comfortable enough. So the space, sideways, as well. I mean, if I put my elbows out, there's quite a distance to, the edges of the tent. So that's all actually really, really good. So yeah, in this configuration, pretty happy. So now what I've done is this is my pack tonight, a 70-litre Osprey, and I've brought it into the vestibule area. And again, you can see there's still tons of space here. So obviously a tent is designed potentially for 2 people. So if you had 2 packs in, if I move my leg, you would probably just still have a pretty narrow tunnel to work in, or you could certainly get the 2 packs on top of one another. So there actually is quite good vestibule space, even though the vestibule is pretty aerodynamic. Just out of interest, I've had quite a few. I am actually really well organised. I have tons of gear and kit with me tonight for both filming and for one of the disadvantages of camping in sand. But yeah, I've got quite a lot of kit with me tonight. But I've just had batteries issues. I had a problem with my current phone, and I've had to change it over to like an older phone. And I've used the older phone for 2 days, and it's been working absolutely fine, like perfect. Even checked it out, downloaded new software onto it, and even was flying my drone with it, and it was brilliant. But and it's been okay battery wise, but the battery just seems to really get hammered with the cold. So I started off today with battery at 100%, and by the time I sort of did some filming and the cold got at it, it was down to like 6% there. So then I had to charge that. So then the camera that you're seeing, I had two batteries up for it. And with filming, putting the tent up and doing a few bits and pieces, then I was actually in the middle of one of my film bits and the battery died in it too. So I have to swap over the battery. So a few wee technical issues, and this is why it's an awful lot easier if you're doing this in your back garden, to be honest. When you're actually doing it out in the field, you have a lot of other things, like rain and weather and things that sort of work against you. But it sort of lets you see, what we can do. Now, one of the aspects of it don't really mention on this tent, and I'm actually not really that sure how well it will work or not, but theoretically it should work, and that is even just unhooking the inner. I've unhooked some bits here so that you can move that back. So if I wanted, for example, this is obviously a bit of an issue at the moment. I can probably zip it down even more and probably find somewhere to tuck it in. And this is why I'm kind of saying, look, there are some of you guys that are out here that have used this tent and used it extensively, and I can't, manage that and learn everything about it in a quick space of time. But even now I've tucked that back a bit and then I've actually retracted the inner back. I would have absolutely no problem, if the weather was much worse, no problems at all, bringing this in pretty close here. And in fact, back further even inside a tent. So that's a good asset. And they talk about it quite a lot on the inner and some of the other tents, but not so much here on this one. So great just to unclip the inner, just give you that wee bit more room. And I would actually do that because I can just sit here comfortably out of the way of weather or whatever the weather's throwing at me and manage this. So that's just another option with the actual porch. Whoops. There you go. Should have been paying attention when I was talking, but sure. That's the excitement. You always see something you maybe don't expect. And the other thing is here is sand is actually getting everywhere, which is a bit of a pain, but it still adds. I'm not really complaining. I mean, it's an amazing campsite. So just because this is hot, I'm kind of just moving it away outside the tent, and I'm going to try and look now just for some hot chocolate. So I'll catch up in a moment. So this section of the review is really on the internal volume in this tent, and I'm going to try not to move around too much because when you move around all the noises are exaggerated, and this thermarest you can't touch that, the noise is just actually so loud. So look, I have two mattresses lying in the tent. One is obviously the thermarest, the other is the X-Bed Fleximat, and if I was to push the two mats right to the side of the tent, there would be about that much space in the middle, so there's really, really good space. Now for me, if I'm moving towards the inner of the tent, or sorry, the middle of the tent, I can kind of move back to here. So nearly the first half of the tent, I can sit up and I can move right forward, nearly to the front of the tent, seated. And I can do that actually. I'm sitting offset to the side at the moment. I can do that sitting in exactly the same position on the other sort of side of the tent. So the volume is really, really impressive. Now, if I'm to lie back as well, I can even lie and be quite comfortable in this position. And there's still reasonably good height towards the back of the tent, which is great. Storage in the tent. On either side, you've got like 4 pockets, and each pocket, is about that size, about that depth, so really, really good for organising gear. Now, if I'm just, again, trying to avoid touching this thermarest, you probably heard it in some of the other bits, in some of the other clips. Just to sort of give you an idea, I mean, if I'm lying down here, there really is, I'm 6'1", as I said earlier, there really is tons of room in here. Now, one thing I did sort of mention is that the ground sheet of this tent is massive. I mean, if you look down to see where my feet are, it comes up so high up the side walls of the tent. That gives you really great protection, and I must admit, there's probably some reason that Hilleberg have done that, but it's more than a bathtub. I mean, it is literally a foot, if not more. You know, I have a size 11 there, and it's, you know, still, you know, a good bit higher. So that's just some of the internal aspects. Yeah, and I find I can, you know, I can turn around and move in this tent so much easier than I can. Like, I just can't. You know, I'm not the most flexible in the world, and I just can't move in some of the other tents. You know, my Hilleberg solo, I really struggle in it. I mean, I can manage, but it's just not comfortable. Whereas this, you know, just even getting turned, when you're getting turned in a tent, you know, you've got, and this whole area of turning, when you're in a Hilleberg solo, the tent's right up you, and you just can't, you know, you're stuck on either side. You just can't really get turned in it. So this is really, really good too. So, excuse me, impressed. But the most magnificent and super impressive feature of this tent ever is the tension on the inner. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, the panels are cut perfectly, and the way that it's pulled out, it's just amazing. And it's as good. I've owned about 10 inner tent first pitching, and I know there's a lot of people who advocate those because of the tension on the inner, and it gives you a quieter night's sleep. Unfortunately, I'm not going to get a chance, I don't think, to test this in the wind, but you know, a tight inner kind of vibrates in the wind as opposed to actually flapping. And the tension on the inner here is, you know, is as good as I said earlier, any inner tent that I have. So that's really an interior volume. You know, I can, as I said, I'm sitting here, excuse the noise at the moment, but just to demonstrate, when I do move across onto the thermarest, you know, I mean, again here, you know, so from, and if I move back, that's me kind of touching the roof of the tent now. So for me moving right back really here, I mean, it's nearly the front 2/3 of the tent. There's really good bubbly sort of volume in it for moving around. So interior volume, really surprising. You know, I'm absolutely delighted with it. It's really good. So at the start of the video, I mentioned that I would discuss, you know, another Hilleberg tent that I think is very comparable with this. Now, actually, there are lots of them. I keep meaning to do it. Maybe someone will do it in the comment section for me, and that's look up and work out how many Hilleberg tents they make in around 3 kilograms. Yeah, loads and loads and loads. So look, the one that I think, you know, if I was buying a tent, whether it would be this one or else it would actually be the Hilleberg Match, and then the Match 2, not the GT version, just the standard Match. Both are very, very comparable weight-wise. And I sort of think both would be very, very comparable performance-wise too. Now, the advantages of the Match would simply be that, you know, it has all the black label fabrics, you know, so that the ground sheet, for example, or is like 100 denier, and the fly sheet and inner tent are 40 denier as opposed to the 30 than this. So as it is, yeah, these guys are 30 in the red labels. So it just means it's more durable, and it just will stand the test of time longer. Not that these don't. I mean, these are incredibly durable fabrics, and they're probably thicker than an awful lot of manufacturers' fabrics. But the denier is, yeah, just the thickness of the fabric. So, I mean, the Match, I think, has the advantage because it has those tougher fabrics. It has even better interior volume than this. It has better vestibule to work around. And it's faster. I wouldn't say it's probably easier and faster to set up. Now, you don't have the advantage that you build it from the ground up. It's just a pull sleeve thing. You fire the pull sleeves in, keep the poles down kind of horizontal, and then pull it out till everything's up vertical. And even if you were to double pull, whatever end is facing the wind, you'd still be pretty much the same, you know, weight as this. So that's why I think the Match 2 is a tremendous tent, and would be the one that I would pick. I'm not saying over this, but it would be between these two if I was looking personally for what I'm looking for a a 2-person tent, but mainly to spend my own time in it. Now, the disadvantage of the Match is that there's very, very poor tension on the inner, and it's a 2-pole tunnel tent. If the poles are actually pushed together by the wind, then the bit in the middle kind of bows, and it really does bow down. You know, this here will pop and crack literally in the wind. Still very, very stable, but just not as comfortable because of the tension on the inner. So that's a big advantage that this has. And then I also think this has an advantage in it's very, very aerodynamic. So again, it'll potentially flap around, that little bit more. And I do like these, the way that you build them, from the ground up. So they've all got pros and cons. I could talk about, the Alac 2, with the twin vestibules, or the KTM 2. There's just so many. But for me, it would be the Nomad 2 would be the one that would be giving us the closest run for its money. All right, so in relation to durability of tents, if you spend your hard-earned money on something, you want to make sure that it will last. And in general, durability is in direct proportion to in the outdoor industry. Oops, there's the doors just moved. Let's have a look and see. Yep, give me a second and I'll just fix that. Back again. So I think I was at the point where in the outdoor industry, durability is to some extent dependent on the thickness, of the fabrics. Obviously, some fabrics are more durable than others, but tent manufacturers will use, they don't all use similar fabrics, but being against the thickness of the fabric will determine durability. So, for example, the ground sheet on this tent is actually 70 denier, and there are a lot of ground sheets on other tents that would maybe only be 50 or 40, or even right down to 20 denier, and that just saves weight, and the tent looks good on paper, but durability wise, those ground sheets are just so easy to puncture. Now, the inner on this tent and the fly sheet in this tent are 30 denier nylon, and again, that's generally a little bit thicker than the industry standard. Makes it heavier, but it's just stronger, and it's just more durable, and particularly for accidental damage. I had a ground sheet on a tent once from it was like an expedition tent from a reputable manufacturer. I set it out in the field one day and I went and sat in it, and I got a spike in my bum, and it was a thistle had actually punctured through the ground sheet, and it actually, believe it or not, was a 70 denier ground sheet. Well, Hilleberg state, that these are highly puncture resistant ground sheets, and I've no doubt, that they actually are. Now, durability wise, the ground sheet also has a hydrostatic head of 15,000 millimeters, and that's how much water pressure it needs to sort of actually force water to go through it. And again, most other tents are in around 10,000. So over the years, if your tent starts, say, at 15,000, and over 5 years, say, just for sake of argument, it loses some of that hydrostatic head, just to general wear and tear. After 5 years, it's still at your 10,000, whereas one that starts at 10,000 after 5 years is down to 5,000. I think I've got the maths on that right. I think you know what I'm saying, so it's a better place to start. Also, the fly on this has a hydrostatic head of 5,000 millimeters. So again, that's higher than a lot of other ones. And again, over the years, if that deteriorates, it's still really, really well above what would be considered waterproof. The poles in this tent, DAC poles, pretty industry standard. I'm certainly not going to say they're any better, than anyone else's. They're right up there. They're really, really good poles. And I've used tent poles from DAC, from Easton, from Yunnan, I think it is, and a few other ones too. And I think the DAC, are definitely probably would be my favourite. So that's it really for durability. All right. Good morning. I've actually had a pretty good night's sleep in this tent. It's got quite windy this morning. I've been out and measured it at sort of 25 miles an hour. As I always say, it's really hard to sort of stand out for 10 minutes to sort of record the gusts. So I would say it's definitely constant at 25 miles per hour, and the gusts would probably be 30, 35. And it's giving you an idea now of what's sort of happening inside the tent. Now, as I mentioned last night, the inside of this tent is really, really taut, so it really, really helps for a comfortable night's sleep. We'll talk a bit more about weather resistance in a moment, but I want to sort of now talk just about ventilation and condensation management. Now, last night I actually slept, just because the ground is sort of angled this way slightly. I decided, you know what, I'm just going to sleep with my head at this end, because I don't like too much blood running to my head. So anyway, I was lying down like this, head down this way, and obviously the back of the tent here doesn't really have the ventilation, and I didn't have the front door open like I did now, but I had the vents here open a little bit, and I must say, there was zero condensation. Those are really, really good. But the condensation ventilation thing, if you want a 4-season tent, you know, you got to seal out the weather, and if you're going to seal out something, you're also going to seal in something, and that's moisture, and you get more condensation. If ventilation is the biggest thing to you, then get a 3-season tent, you know. So, but anyway, that's my rant over. Maybe it's easy for me to say that here in Northern Ireland, where it's always windy and I never really have any condensation issues. But moving on from sort of ventilation then, let's sort of talk about weather resistance in relation to high winds and snow loading. So as I said at the very start of the video, look, some of you guys will have owned this tent, and I've had it out in different conditions as to what I've had. But here, you know, I've got experience of sort of, let's say, you know, in around 30-mile-an-hour winds, and the tent is coping, you know, really well. The way that the guys with the fly sheet first design and the guys going directly to the poles, you know, they give the tent, you know, really tremendous support. And it's sort of shifting around a little bit, but there's no real flapping of the fabric. The fabric's more sort of vibrating that little bit. The tent is also very aerodynamic from both the rear and the front, which really helps with wind resistance. Now, there is some talk that in extreme winds, you should actually pitch this tent vestibule into the wind, just because of this extra supporting pole, you know, here. I would say that probably is the case. I've actually approached Hilleberg, but I haven't got an official answer yet. But what I'll do is I'll put the official answer in the comments or the description section of this video. So face into the wind then, you know, the vestibule here is, you know, even more aerodynamic than what the back of the tent would be, and it is supported by the extra pole and the guy line, so it actually makes sense. But you just lose a little bit of functionality, you know, there, although you could retract the inner back like I'd shown you last night, which would also help. Now, if a tent is particularly aerodynamic, then it allows snow to build up a little bit more on those bits of the tent are obviously like that. If the tent's walls are vertical, snow can't really build up on them, but if it's more aerodynamic, you can get a weight of snow. I don't really think that's a problem because the poles are very strong, the fabrics are very strong, and again, those poles are directly supported by the guy lines. So snow loading, I think the tent is pretty well proven. So wind resistance and snow resistance all pretty good in a tent, and as I said, you've got a bit of an idea now to see what it's like. So now it's the time of my video that comes down to my sort of final thoughts on this Hilleberg Jannu. I mean, I don't really have too many bad words, as I'm sure you know, about any Hilleberg products. You know, I think they're very good. But like everything, I mean, with the laws of physics, there are compromises. You know, so I mean, this tent is the compromise in this tent is it is supported by the guy lines, but that's not, you know, it's not a be all and end all. I mean, the tent, you know, has pretty much the strength of a full geodesic structure because of the guy lines and the way that the guy lines are supported. But you know, the weight is only like just over 3 kilograms, so really good. I have to say, I love the tension on this inner. It's a real bonus for me because I actually come from many years of inner first pitching tents, and I always really thought, why can't they put, you know, and have other tents as taut as this one? Because all the ones that I've had before, I know the likes of a match which only has 2 poles supporting the structure can't be, but the likes of the Hilleberg Solo, for example, I think, you know, the inner could be a lot tighter. But that just has made, you know, for a really comfortable night's sleep. Although, as you can see, there still is a fair, you know, amount of movement. I was really impressed, you know, by the inner space, you know, and volume in the tent. You know, pretty good actually for 2 people. You could actually, you know, sleep head to foot if needed, but you know, you could sleep obviously normally head to head, you know, very easily, because the back of the tent I think is slightly narrower. And just, you know, the seated up volume. You know, I'm now back. You know, I'm sitting on my thermal rest, although I am bottoming it out, but I'm now sitting back, you know, in the back third of the tent, so that this whole front area, you know, you can actually, you know, sit up, and it's really good for. I just find it so easy and so much easier than my other tents for organizing gear. The vestibule, you know, really good space there. and practically 90% of the time you're going to use this tent, you're going to be pitched tail end of the wind, and you've got all that vestibule space. It actually is quite broad, you know, so I would find you could get two large packs on top of one another, and then you've plenty of workable space. But at the end of the day, as you know, it is designed as an alpine sort of tent, to be placed on narrow ridges and to be used, you know, in those sorts of scenarios. So there's some compromises, you know, on space. Pitching a tent, you know, I actually found it very, very easy. It still just does take a little bit more time, just simply because you have to have all the guy lines done up. And if you don't, you'll have a tangled mess of guy lines and pulled clips. And as I said, if you get caught out with that one, well, you do. I actually haven't, because I sort of was wary of it before I started. So the pitching is pretty good, very, very simple and really, really straightforward. You know, 2 longitudinal pulls in first, transverse pull in, really good. But it just does take a wee bit more time to secure it, particularly if the conditions are tricky. Like, I'm on sort of sand at the moment, but I knew it wasn't going to be too windy, and I was lucky enough that I had extra pegs, so I was able to secure each peg with that. If I wouldn't have had the extra pegs, it would have been running around trying to find boulders, and that just does take a bit of time. So look, great tent, you know, I would definitely recommend it. I've been pretty impressed with it, a bit more impressed than I actually thought. And once again, you know, thanks to Gary Nesbitt for lending me the tent. Really, really do appreciate it. So thanks very much for watching. Do check out, you know, the description. Also, in the description, if you want, you can buy me a coffee, okay, just to support the channel a little bit more. It does take, I mean, I totally love doing this, but it's a lot of time and effort carrying up camera equipment. I do love getting my drone out, but I mean, the whole thing weighs like, you know, 2 kilograms with battery and controller. And today I actually brought up 2 spare batteries, which I haven't used. I hate bringing up stuff which I don't use. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of effort goes into this. You know, a lot of effort goes into the filming, you know, trying to get it right, you know, even tidying up the tent before sticking the camera on, little details like that, you know, all take effort. So look, if you can buy me a coffee, that's great. Thank you for your support and watching the channel. I'm really interested in your comments. Next video, probably be the LED Lenser Neo 5R, you know, which is sort of previewed in a couple of my other videos. So again, thanks for watching, and that'll be up soon.